In the early hours of a misty September morning in 2019, Sergeant James Mitchell stood at his post outside the King's private study at Highgrove House, watching shadows move where they shouldn't be moving. For 12 years, he had served the Royal Protection Unit with unwavering dedication, following every protocol, obeying every command without question. But today, everything he believed about duty and loyalty would be tested in ways he never imagined. The encrypted message hidden in his uniform pocket contained information that could save the King's life or destroy James's career forever. Intelligence gathered through unofficial channels suggested a coordinated threat unlike anything the security services had encountered before. The problem wasn't just the danger itself, but who might be involved in covering it up. As footsteps echoed down the corridor and familiar voices discussed weekend arrangements in hushed tones, James faced an impossible choice: follow the chain of command and risk the King's safety, or break every rule he had sworn to uphold and trust his instincts that something was terribly wrong at the highest levels of royal security. Sometimes the greatest act of loyalty requires the deepest betrayal of trust. Sometimes protecting what you serve means destroying everything you've built, and sometimes a single decision made in the space of a heartbeat can change the course of history itself. This is the true story of how one royal guard's courage to break protocol saved a life and exposed a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of the British establishment. James Mitchell had always believed that being a royal guard meant being invisible. For 12 years, he had perfected the art of blending into the background, of seeing everything while appearing to notice nothing. His colleagues often joked that he was like a piece of furniture that happened to carry a gun and wear a uniform. But on that September morning at Highgrove House, being invisible would become both his greatest asset and his most dangerous liability. The Gloucestershire estate stretched out before him in the pre-dawn darkness, its manicured gardens and ancient trees creating familiar silhouettes against the gray sky. James had walked these grounds thousands of times, memorizing every path, every hiding spot, every potential security risk. Highgrove was supposed to be the King's sanctuary, a place where protocol could be slightly relaxed and the weight of the crown could rest a little lighter on royal shoulders. That morning started like any other. James arrived at 0500 hours for the morning briefing, his polished boots clicking against the stone floors of the security annex. Chief Inspector Sarah Hartwell stood at the front of the room, her crisp uniform and stern expression commanding immediate attention from the 12 officers assembled before her. She had run royal security at Highgrove for 8 years, and her reputation for thoroughness was legendary throughout the Royal Protection Unit. "Standard protocols today, everyone," Hartwell announced, consulting her tablet. "His Majesty will be receiving the Minister of Agriculture at 1400 hours, followed by a private consultation with his financial advisors. Garden walk scheduled for 16:30, weather permitting. Nothing unusual expected." James took his assigned position in the morning rotation, stationed outside the King's private study where His Majesty typically spent his early hours reviewing correspondence and preparing for the day ahead. It was a coveted assignment, requiring years of proven reliability and absolute discretion. The study contained some of the most sensitive documents in the realm, and the conversations that took place behind its heavy oak doors could influence policy decisions affecting millions of people. As he took his post, James noticed something that made him pause. The groundskeeping crew was working unusually early, their figures barely visible in the morning mist as they moved around the ornamental pond near the main house. In all his years at Highgrove, maintenance work never began before 070 hours. The King valued his morning tranquility, and Chief Inspector Hartwell enforced this preference with military precision. James activated his radio discreetly. "Control, this is Mitchell. I have eyes on groundskeeping activity near the main house. Can you confirm authorization?" The response came back immediately. "Mitchell, this is Control. Confirmed. Emergency repairs to the irrigation system. Authorized by Maintenance Supervisor. Proceed with standard protocols." Something about the response bothered James, though he couldn't immediately identify what. The voice belonged to Constable Peters, who worked the morning control desk, and there was nothing unusual in his tone or words. But James had developed an instinct for detecting inconsistencies over his years of service, and that instinct was now sending quiet warning signals through his mind. He watched the groundskeepers more carefully. There were 4 of them, dressed in the standard dark green uniforms worn by all Highgrove maintenance staff. They moved efficiently around the pond area, carrying what appeared to be standard equipment. But their movements seemed too purposeful, too coordinated for routine repair work. Real groundskeepers tended to move more casually, stopping to examine plants or chat with each other. These men worked with military precision. At 063 hours, the king emerged from his private quarters for his customary morning walk through the gardens. James fell into step behind him, maintaining the prescribed distance while scanning the grounds for any potential threats. His Majesty moved slowly, stopping frequently to examine his beloved plants and trees. The king's passion for organic farming and environmental conservation was well known, and these morning inspections were as much about personal satisfaction as they were about staying informed on estate operations. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Mitchell?" the king remarked as they passed the rose garden. "Indeed, Your Majesty," James replied, his attention divided between conversation and surveillance. This was one of the things he appreciated about his assignment. Unlike some members of the royal family, the king often acknowledged his protection officers as human beings rather than invisible fixtures. "I understand we're having some irrigation difficulties," the king continued, gesturing toward the maintenance crew. "Unfortunate timing, really." "I was hoping to show the agriculture minister the new organic certification displays this afternoon." James felt that warning instinct flare again. The king seemed to know about the maintenance work, which should have reassured him, but something in the casual way His Majesty mentioned it suggested he had been told about it recently, perhaps just that morning. James made a mental note to check with the estate manager about the timing of the repair authorization. They completed the circuit of the main gardens without incident, returning to the house as the sun finally broke through the morning clouds. The king retired to his study and James resumed his position outside the door. But instead of settling into the comfortable routine of standing guard, he found himself thinking about the maintenance crew and their oddly coordinated movements. At 0800 hours, James was relieved for his breakfast break. Instead of heading directly to the staff dining area, he made a detour to the estate management office. Mrs. Eleanor Pembroke, who had managed Highgrove's day-to-day operations for 15 years, was already at her desk, surrounded by the organized chaos of schedules, budgets, and maintenance requests that kept the estate running smoothly. "Good morning, Mrs. Pembroke," James said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Busy morning with the irrigation repairs, I imagine." Mrs. Pembroke looked up from her computer with a confused expression. "Irrigation repairs? I'm not aware of any scheduled maintenance this morning. The system was inspected just last week and everything was functioning perfectly." The warning instinct in James's mind suddenly became a screaming alarm. "Could you check your maintenance log? There's a crew working on the pond area right now." Mrs. Pembroke's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up the estate's maintenance scheduling system. Her frown deepened as she scrolled through the entries. "James, there's nothing scheduled for today. No irrigation work, no emergency repairs, nothing that would require a crew to be working this early." Could it have been authorized directly by someone else? Maybe through security channels? All maintenance work goes through this office, regardless of who requests it. It's been that way for over a decade. Insurance requirements, you understand. Mrs. Pembroke's voice carried a note of concern now. "Are you saying there's an unauthorized crew on the grounds?" James felt his pulse quicken. "I need you to call Chief Inspector Hartwell immediately. Don't use the regular channels. Call her personal mobile." While Mrs. Pembroke made the call, James stepped outside and used his binoculars to observe the maintenance crew more carefully. What he saw made his blood run cold. The men weren't working on irrigation equipment at all. They were installing something near the ornamental pond, something that looked suspiciously like electronic surveillance equipment. One of the crew members looked up and seemed to notice James watching them. The man said something to his colleagues, and all four of them suddenly became very focused on their work, turning their backs to conceal what they were doing. James grabbed his radio but then hesitated. If these men had somehow been cleared through official channels, reporting them as suspicious could end his career. But if they were unauthorized and potentially dangerous, failing to act could have catastrophic consequences. Pembroke appeared at his elbow, her face pale. "Chief Inspector Hartwell says she authorized no such work. She's requesting immediate backup to investigate." "How long until backup arrives?" 20 minutes at minimum. James looked across the grounds toward the pond. The crew had finished whatever they were installing and were now packing up their equipment with efficient speed. In 20 minutes, they would be gone, along with any evidence of what they had been doing. He made his decision. "Mrs. Pembroke, I need you to call the King's private secretary immediately. Tell him that under no circumstances should His Majesty go near the pond area today. Make up whatever excuse necessary, but keep him away from that location." "What are you going to do?" James was already moving toward the maintenance shed, where he knew groundskeeping tools and vehicles were stored. "I'm going to find out what they installed and who they really are." The next 20 minutes would prove to be the longest of James Mitchell's career. As he approached the pond area, trying to look like he was conducting a routine security sweep, he realized that he was potentially walking into a situation that could end his life as easily as it could end his career. But something deeper than professional duty was driving him forward, something that had been instilled in him during his military service years before he joined the Royal Protection Unit. When faced with a clear threat to the people you're sworn to protect, you don't wait for permission to act. You don't worry about protocol or consequences. You simply do what needs to be done, regardless of the cost to yourself. As James reached the ornamental pond, he could see the fresh, disturbed earth where the crew had been working. Whatever they had installed was well hidden, but his trained eye could detect the subtle signs of recent excavation. Using a small trowel from the nearby gardening station, he began carefully digging. What he uncovered would change everything. Not just his own life, but the entire security apparatus protecting the British royal family. Hidden beneath 6 inches of carefully replaced soil was a small electronic device that he immediately recognized as a remotely triggered explosive charge, powerful enough to kill anyone within a 30-foot radius. The device was sophisticated, military-grade, and completely invisible to casual observation. If the king had taken his usual afternoon walk past the pond, as he did several times each week, he would have been walking directly into a killing zone that could be activated from miles away. James carefully photographed the device with his phone, taking multiple shots from different angles to document its position and construction. Then he faced another terrible decision. Standard protocol demanded that he immediately secure the area and wait for the bomb disposal team. But the device could be triggered at any moment, and there was no way to know if the people who planted it were still monitoring the situation. More importantly, the fact that the installation had been cleared through official security channels meant that someone within the Royal Protection System was either compromised or complicit. Until he could determine who could be trusted, everyone was potentially suspect. As he carefully covered the device and restored the area to its original appearance, James realized that he was no longer just a royal guard following orders. He had become something much more dangerous and much more valuable. He had become a man who knew too much, operating outside the system he had served faithfully for over a decade. The sound of approaching vehicles announced the arrival of Chief Inspector Hartwell's backup team. James walked calmly back toward the main house, his mind racing through the implications of what he had discovered. Someone had used official channels to place a bomb designed to assassinate the king. Someone with access to security protocols and authorization codes had orchestrated an attack that would have succeeded, if not for James's suspicious nature and willingness to investigate irregularities. As he rejoined the security detail, James realized that his real work was just beginning. Identifying the threat had been the easy part. Now he had to figure out how to neutralize it without alerting the conspirators that they had been discovered. He had to find a way to warn the king without using communication channels that might be monitored by the very people trying to kill him. Most challenging of all, he had to do all of this while maintaining the appearance of a loyal guard following standard protocols. One wrong move, one suspicious action, and he would either be eliminated as a threat or dismissed as paranoid. Either outcome would leave the king vulnerable and the conspiracy intact. Standing at his post outside the royal study, listening to the king's voice as he conducted his morning phone calls, James Mitchell understood that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. He was no longer just protecting the king from external threats. He was protecting him from enemies within the very system designed to keep him safe. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. But along with the weight came a clarity of purpose that he had never experienced before. For the first time in his 12-year career, James Mitchell was no longer invisible. He was the one man standing between the king and a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of British security. and he was completely alone. The afternoon brought no relief from the tension that had been building in James Mitchell's chest since his discovery at the pond. As he maintained his post outside the king's study, every sound in the corridor seemed amplified, every shadow potentially threatening. The bomb hidden in the garden represented more than just a physical danger. It was evidence of a conspiracy so sophisticated and well-placed that it had penetrated the very heart of royal security. At 13:30 hours, James watched Chief Inspector Hartwell approach with her characteristic brisk stride. Her investigation of the unauthorized maintenance crew had concluded, and from her expression, the news was not reassuring. She motioned for James to follow her to a private conference room away from the main security station. "Mitchell, I need to debrief you on this morning's incident," she began, closing the door behind them. "The crew you reported has vanished completely. No trace of them on the estate, no record of how they gained access, and no one seems to know who authorized their presence." James maintained a carefully neutral expression, though his pulse quickened. "What about the work they were doing at the pond? That's where things get interesting. According to our sweep, they appear to have been conducting some kind of soil analysis. We found testing equipment buried at various points around the ornamental pond area. Harmless enough, but completely unauthorized and potentially problematic from a security standpoint." The lie was so smoothly delivered that James almost believed it himself. Hartwell was either genuinely mistaken about what had been found, or she was deliberately covering up the discovery of the explosive device. Either possibility was deeply troubling, but for different reasons. "Have we determined how they gained access to the estate?" James asked. "That's still under investigation. But I want to commend you for your vigilance this morning. Your attention to detail potentially prevented a serious security breach." Hartwell's praise felt genuine, but James couldn't shake the feeling that he was being carefully evaluated as she spoke. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "Indeed. Now, I need you to understand that this incident is classified at the highest level. No discussion with other staff members. No mention in personal communications. The official report will indicate a minor maintenance issue that was resolved without incident." James nodded, understanding that he was being told to forget what he had seen. But the image of that explosive device was burned into his memory, along with the terrible knowledge that someone was actively trying to kill the king while using the security system itself as cover. After Hartwell dismissed him, James returned to his duties with a new awareness of how isolated he truly was. If the chief inspector was involved in the conspiracy, then reporting through official channels would be suicide. If she was simply being fed false information by someone higher up the chain, then she was as much a potential victim as the king himself. The Minister of Agriculture arrived precisely at 1400 hours, and James took his position in the corridor outside the study where the meeting would take place. The minister, a tall man with graying hair and an expensive suit, seemed nervous as he waited to be announced. James had seen hundreds of government officials over the years, and most carried themselves with the confidence that came from wielding significant power. This man seemed different, constantly checking his watch and glancing around as if expecting something to go wrong. The meeting lasted exactly 40 minutes, and when the minister emerged, his nervousness had transformed into something that looked more like relief. As he passed James in the corridor, the minister dropped his briefcase, spilling papers across the stone floor. James immediately moved to help gather the scattered documents, and in doing so, caught a glimpse of text that made his blood freeze. One of the papers bore the letterhead of a private security consulting firm called Blackstone Strategic Services, and the visible portion of the text included phrases like asset elimination protocol and plausible deniability framework. The minister snatched the papers back quickly, but not before James had seen enough to confirm his worst fears. The assassination attempt wasn't just some external threat using inside information. It was being coordinated with people who had official access to the king's schedule and security arrangements. The Minister of Agriculture, a man who regularly met with the king to discuss environmental policy and rural development, was apparently part of a conspiracy that extended into the highest levels of government. James felt the walls of his carefully ordered world collapsing around him. For 12 years, he had operated under the assumption that the greatest threats to royal security came from outside the system: terrorists, foreign agents, unstable individuals who might attempt to breach palace security or attack during public appearances. The idea that the threat could come from within the government itself, from people who had sworn oaths of loyalty and service, was almost incomprehensible. As the afternoon progressed, James found himself analyzing every interaction with new suspicion. When Constable Peters approached him with a routine communication update, James wondered if the man who had confirmed the morning's maintenance work was complicit or simply following orders from someone else. When the king's private secretary discussed the evening's schedule, James listened for any hint of unusual arrangements or last-minute changes that might create new opportunities for attack. At 1600 hours, the king announced his intention to take his customary garden walk. James felt panic surge through his system, as he realized that the route would take them directly past the pond where the explosive device remained hidden. He had to find a way to redirect the walk without raising suspicion or revealing his knowledge of the threat. "Your Majesty," James said carefully as they prepared to leave the house, "I've received some concern from the estate manager about possible damage to the south garden paths from this morning's maintenance work. Perhaps we might explore the north gardens today instead." The king paused, considering the suggestion. "Maintenance work? I thought that was completed this morning." "Yes, Your Majesty, but Mrs. Pembroke is concerned about potential soft spots in the ground that might be unsafe for walking." "Well, we certainly can't have that. The north gardens it is then. I've been meaning to check on the progress of the new organic herb beds anyway." The relief James felt was almost overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by the realization that he had bought only temporary time. The bomb was still there, still active, still capable of killing the king if he ventured too close. James needed to find a way to have it safely removed without alerting the conspirators that their plan had been discovered. During the walk through the north gardens, James used his radio to request a private meeting with Mrs. Pembroke. When they returned to the house, he made his way to the estate management office, where he found her working on the weekly groundskeeping schedule. "Mrs. Pembroke, I need to ask you something in complete confidence," he began, closing the door behind him. "Of course, James. What's troubling you?" "This morning's maintenance crew. I need you to help me understand exactly how estate access is controlled. Is it possible for someone to authorize work without going through your office?" Mrs. Pembroke set down her pen and gave him her full attention. "James, I've been managing this estate for 15 years. Every delivery, every service call, every maintenance request goes through this office. It's not just policy, it's practical necessity. We need to coordinate schedules, ensure insurance coverage, verify credentials. There is absolutely no way for outside workers to access the grounds without my direct authorization. What about security overrides? Emergency situations? Even then, I would be notified immediately. The security staff might authorize temporary access, but they would coordinate with me within hours to ensure proper documentation." She paused, studying his expression. "James, what exactly are you concerned about?" James made a decision that would irrevocably alter his relationship with the estate and potentially put Mrs. Pembroke in danger. "I believe someone is using security channels to gain unauthorized access to the estate. Someone with high-level credentials and detailed knowledge of our protocols." Mrs. Pembroke went pale. "Are you suggesting that someone within the security system is compromised?" "I'm saying that what happened this morning should have been impossible under normal circumstances, and I'm concerned that it might happen again. What do you need from me?" "I need you to document everything about this morning. Every communication, every system access, every person who might have had knowledge of the king's schedule. And I need you to do it without alerting anyone else that you're conducting this review." "James, if you're right about this, we're both in serious danger."
"I know."
"But if I'm right, and we don't act, the king is in much greater danger." "Mrs. Sir." Pembroke opened a new file on her computer and began typing rapidly. "I'll have a complete access log for you within 2 hours." "But James, what are you planning to do with this information?" "I'm not sure yet, but I know I can't use normal security channels to report it." That evening, James found himself in a position he had never experienced during his years of royal protection duty. For the first time, he was actively concealing information from his superiors and operating outside established protocols. The weight of what he knew felt crushing, but the alternative was unthinkable. At 2100 hours, as the estate settled into its nighttime routine, James made another decision that violated every rule he had sworn to uphold. Using his security access, he returned to the pond area, under cover of darkness, to conduct a more detailed examination of the explosive device. What he discovered was even more alarming than his initial assessment. The device was not just a simple bomb designed to kill the king during his garden walks. It was part of a more sophisticated system that included remote monitoring equipment and what appeared to be backup triggering mechanisms. Someone had invested significant time and resources in creating a foolproof assassination system. More disturbing still was the discovery of additional equipment that had been installed in other locations around the estate. Using a small tactical flashlight, James found evidence of surveillance devices that had been placed to monitor the king's movements and communication patterns. The morning's maintenance crew had not just planted a bomb, they had installed a comprehensive surveillance and elimination system that could track the king's activities and create multiple opportunities for attack. As James carefully documented each discovery with his phone's camera, he realized that he was accumulating evidence of a conspiracy that extended far beyond a simple assassination attempt. Someone was gathering detailed intelligence on the king's personal habits, security arrangements, and daily routines. The level of planning and sophistication suggested a long-term operation with substantial financial backing and professional expertise. The most terrifying aspect of his discoveries was the realization that the surveillance equipment could be used to monitor his own investigation. If the conspirators were actively watching the estate, they might already know that he had discovered their devices. His life could be in immediate danger, and he would have no way of knowing until it was too late. Standing in the darkness beside the ornamental pond, with the weight of evidence heavy in his pocket and the knowledge of conspiracy burning in his mind, James Mitchell understood that he had reached a point of no return.
He could not pretend that nothing had happened.
He could not rely on official channels to address the threat, and he could not continue to operate alone if he wanted to save the king's life. But reaching out for help meant identifying people he could trust in a system that had already been penetrated by enemies. It meant risking exposure and potentially alerting the conspirators that their plan had been discovered. It meant choosing between his duty to follow orders and his deeper obligation to protect the life of the man he had sworn to serve. As he made his way back to the security annex, James Mitchell realized that tomorrow would bring decisions that would define not just his career, but his character. The invisible royal guard was about to become the most visible threat to a conspiracy that had been years in the making. And somewhere in the darkness, people with sophisticated surveillance equipment and military-grade weapons were probably already planning his elimination. James Mitchell had barely slept during the night, his mind racing through possible courses of action and their potential consequences. Every option seemed to carry enormous risks, not just for himself but for everyone around him. As dawn broke over Highgrove, he realized that his window for action was rapidly closing. The longer the surveillance equipment remained operational, the more likely it became that his investigation would be discovered. At 0500 hours, James made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 48 hours earlier. Instead of reporting for his regular morning briefing, he used his security credentials to access the estate's communication center during the night shift changeover. The facility was momentarily unmanned, giving him precious minutes to examine the logs of all incoming and outgoing communications from the previous day. What he found confirmed his worst fears about the scope of the conspiracy. Embedded within routine security reports and administrative communications were coded messages that referenced Operation Harvest and Asset Relocation Protocol. The messages were brief and seemingly innocuous, but their timing corresponded exactly with the king's scheduled activities and the arrival of the unauthorized maintenance crew. More alarming still was the discovery that these coded communications had been sent and received using official Royal Protection Unit encryption keys. Someone with the highest level security clearance was coordinating the conspiracy from within the system itself. The betrayal was not just operational but institutional, involving people who had access to the most sensitive royal security information. James photographed the relevant communications with his personal phone, knowing that accessing these logs without authorization was a serious breach of protocol that could result in immediate dismissal and criminal charges. But the evidence was too important to ignore, and he was rapidly running out of people he could trust within the official security structure. As he prepared to leave the communication center, James heard footsteps approaching in the corridor. He quickly closed the computer systems and moved toward the door, hoping to exit before whoever was approaching arrived. But as he reached the threshold, he found himself face to face with Deputy Chief Inspector Marcus Webb, a man he had known and respected for 8 years. "Mitchell, what are you doing in the comm center at this hour?" James felt his pulse spike, but forced his voice to remain calm. "Routine check, sir. I noticed some irregularities in yesterday's logs and wanted to review them before the morning briefing." Webb's expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes suggested that he was evaluating James's explanation for credibility. "What kind of irregularities?" "Timing discrepancies in the maintenance authorization logs. Nothing major, but I wanted to ensure accuracy for Chief Inspector Hartwell's report." "I see. And what did you find in your review?" James realized that he was walking into a trap. If Webb was part of the conspiracy, any detailed answer would reveal how much James knew about the unauthorized activities. If Webb was innocent, involving him without solid evidence of his trustworthiness could put him in danger. "Actually, sir, I think I may have been mistaken. The logs appear to be in order upon closer examination." Webb stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "James, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Are you alone in this investigation?" The question hit James like a physical blow. Webb knew. Either he was part of the conspiracy and was determining the extent of James's knowledge, or he was somehow involved in investigating it himself. Either way, James's cover was blown. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're referring to. The surveillance equipment at the pond, the coded communications, the unauthorized access to estate grounds." Webb's voice carried a weight of knowledge that made further denials pointless. "James, you're not the only one who's noticed irregularities." Relief and terror warred in James's chest. "How long have you known?" "About the equipment?" "Since yesterday evening." "About the communications?" "I've been tracking suspicious patterns for 3 weeks." Webb glanced around the corridor to ensure they were alone. "James, we need to talk privately. But not here, and not using any official channels. Who else knows? That's what we need to discuss. But I can tell you that the conspiracy extends higher than either of us initially suspected, and our time for investigation is running out." Webb led James to a maintenance shed on the far edge of the estate grounds, a location that would be difficult to monitor electronically and unlikely to attract attention from other security personnel. As they walked, James found himself analyzing Webb's behavior for signs of deception or manipulation. Trust had become a luxury he could no longer afford. Inside the shed, surrounded by gardening tools and estate maintenance equipment, Webb revealed the full extent of what he had discovered. For nearly a month, he had been investigating financial irregularities in the estate's security budget. Payments had been made to consulting firms that didn't exist, and equipment purchases had been authorized for items that were never delivered. "The financial trail led me to Blackstone Strategic Services," Webb explained. "On paper, they're a legitimate security consulting firm. In reality, they're a front for a private military contractor, with connections to foreign intelligence services." James felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "I saw that name yesterday." The agriculture minister dropped papers with their letterhead. Webb's expression darkened. "That confirms what I suspected. Minister Harrison isn't just aware of the operation. He's probably one of its architects. But why? What could they possibly gain from killing the king? Think about the succession implications. Think about who benefits from political instability. Think about the economic interests that are affected by the king's environmental policies and his influence on government decision-making." As Webb outlined the scope of the conspiracy, James realized that they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple assassination plot. The attack on the king was apparently part of a larger scheme to destabilize the constitutional monarchy and create opportunities for certain political and economic interests to reshape British society. "How do we stop it?" James asked. "We can't. Not alone and not using official channels. Too many people within the system are either compromised or potentially compromised." "Then what do you suggest?" Webb pulled out a secure phone that James had never seen before. "We go outside the system. There are people in MI5 and MI6 who have been investigating similar irregularities, people who operate independently of the normal security bureaucracy. Are you telling me that you're already working with intelligence services? I'm telling you that when you discover a conspiracy that threatens the constitutional foundation of the country, you find allies wherever you can trust them. Webb made a call that lasted only 90 seconds, speaking in coded language that James couldn't fully understand. When he finished, he turned back to James with an expression that carried both hope and apprehension. There will be a contact at the Tetbury railway station at 1100 hours, platform 2 beside the news kiosk, a woman with a red umbrella carrying today's telegraph. You'll approach her and ask for directions to the Royal Agricultural University. She'll provide assistance, but only if she's convinced that you're legitimate. What about the king's safety in the meantime? That's the most critical issue we face. We need to neutralize the immediate threat without alerting the conspirators that their operation has been compromised. Webb outlined a plan that was both elegant and terrifying in its simplicity. James would use his access to conduct a routine security sweep of the estate, during which he would discover the surveillance equipment and explosive device. The discovery would trigger standard bomb disposal protocols, removing the immediate threat while providing cover for a broader investigation. But if I report the discovery through official channels, won't that alert whoever authorized the installation? That's exactly what we want. We need them to believe that their operation was discovered by chance, not through systematic investigation. It will force them to accelerate their timeline or abandon this particular approach. And what if they simply try again with different methods? That's where our MI5 contact becomes essential. Once we have official intelligence involvement, we can begin tracking the conspiracy at its source, rather than simply reacting to its manifestations. As they prepared to leave the maintenance shed, Webb grabbed James by the shoulder. James, I need you to understand something. Once you make contact with intelligence services, your life changes permanently. You'll never be just a royal guard again. You'll be a witness to treason, a target for elimination, and a permanent security risk in the eyes of people who value secrecy above human life. What choice do we have? None. But I wanted you to understand the cost before you commit to paying it. At 10:30 hours, James drove to Tetbury using his personal vehicle, taking an indirect route that would make surveillance difficult. The small market town was busy with its usual weekday commerce, providing good cover for a clandestine meeting. But as he approached the railway station, James felt the weight of crossing another irreversible threshold. The woman with the red umbrella was exactly where Webb had indicated she would be. Middle-aged, professionally dressed, reading the Telegraph with the casual attention of someone killing time before a train arrival. James approached her with a mixture of fear and determination. "Excuse me, could you direct me to the Royal Agricultural University?" She looked up from her newspaper with intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate him in the span of seconds. "Certainly. You'll want to take the A433 north for about 3 miles, then turn right at the sign for Cirencester. But I think you'll find that the university isn't offering the kind of education you're looking for today." The response confirmed that she was his contact. What kind of education would be more appropriate? The kind that teaches you how to stay alive when your government is trying to kill you. She folded her newspaper and stood up. "Walk with me, but not too close, and don't look around like you're expecting to be followed." As they walked through Tetbury's Market Square, the woman who introduced herself only as Sarah provided James with information that transformed his understanding of the conspiracy he had stumbled into. Blackstone Strategic Services was indeed a front for foreign intelligence operations, but their ultimate goal wasn't just to assassinate the king. They were working to create a political crisis that would justify increased surveillance and security measures throughout the UK. "Think about it," Sarah explained as they paused beside a bookshop window. "A successful assassination of the monarch would trigger the most comprehensive security crackdown in British history. Civil liberties would be suspended, surveillance would be expanded, and public dissent would be criminalized in the name of protecting national security. Who benefits from that kind of political environment? People who profit from security contracts, surveillance technology, and private military services. People who want to reshape British society along more authoritarian lines. How do we stop them? We document everything, preserve the evidence, and expose the conspiracy before they can complete their operation or eliminate the witnesses." Sarah handed James a small electronic device that looked like an ordinary mobile phone charger. "This will allow you to communicate securely with our team. Use it only in emergencies, and never from your regular duty locations." "What happens next?" You return to Highgrove and proceed with the plan Webb outlined. Discover the surveillance equipment, trigger the bomb disposal response, and document everyone who responds to the incident. We'll be monitoring communications and financial transactions to identify the full network. And if something goes wrong? Sarah's expression was grim. Then you'll discover very quickly whether your loyalty to the crown is stronger than their commitment to their profits. As James drove back to Highgrove, he realized that the next few hours would determine not just the king's safety, but the future of British democracy itself. The invisible royal guard had become a key player in a struggle between constitutional government and shadowy forces that valued power above principle. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a clarity of purpose that James had never experienced before. For the first time in his career, he understood exactly why his service mattered and what he was truly protecting. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Highgrove as James Mitchell prepared to execute the most dangerous performance of his career. At 14:30 hours, he would conduct a routine security sweep that would accidentally discover the surveillance equipment and explosive device near the ornamental pond. Everything depended on his ability to appear genuinely surprised by the discovery while ensuring that all relevant evidence was properly documented. Webb had positioned himself in the estate's security command center, ready to coordinate the response and monitor who reacted to the discovery. Their MI5 contact had assured them that intelligence services would be recording all communications and tracking all personnel who became involved in the incident. But the success of their operation required James to walk directly into the killing zone that had been prepared for the king. As James approached the pond area, he activated his body camera and radio transmitter, ensuring that everything would be recorded for analysis. The surveillance equipment would certainly detect his approach, but a routine security patrol would not necessarily alarm the conspirators. They would expect regular sweeps of the estate grounds. The first device James discovered was a motion sensor that had been disguised to look like ordinary gardening equipment. He examined it carefully, photographing its position and construction, before reporting to Webb over the radio. "Control, this is Mitchell. I have suspicious equipment at grid reference 7 Alpha 3, requesting immediate technical evaluation." "Copy, Mitchell. Maintain position and secure the area." Technical team en route. As James waited for backup to arrive, he used the opportunity to conduct a more thorough examination of the surrounding area. What he found exceeded his worst expectations. The conspirators hadn't just installed a single explosive device. They had created an entire kill zone that extended across most of the king's favorite garden paths. Multiple devices were positioned to ensure that the king could not escape once the attack was initiated. Remote detonation systems were buried at strategic points, with backup triggers that could be activated if the primary systems failed. The level of planning and sophistication suggested that the assassins had been studying the king's habits for months, possibly years. The technical team that arrived to examine James's discovery included 3 specialists from the Royal Protection Unit's Bomb Disposal Division. But as James watched them work, he noticed that one of the technicians seemed more interested in documenting the device's position than in determining its purpose. The man was taking detailed photographs and measurements, as if he was gathering intelligence rather than preparing for safe disposal. James activated the secure communication device that Sarah had given him, sending a coded text message that would alert MI5 to the suspicious behavior. Within minutes, he received a response that confirmed his fears. The bomb disposal technician who was documenting the device was not who his credentials claimed him to be. "Mitchell, we have a problem." Webb's voice crackled through his earpiece. "The man examining your discovery isn't on our duty roster for today. His authorization came through emergency channels just 20 minutes ago." The realization that the conspirators had infiltrated the bomb disposal team sent ice through James's veins. They were not just monitoring the situation. They were actively participating in the response, positioning themselves to control how the evidence was handled and what conclusions would be drawn. "Control, I need immediate backup at my location. We have a security breach in progress." But before Webb could respond, James heard the sound of vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Instead of additional Royal Protection Unit personnel, 3 unmarked vans were converging on the pond area at high speed. Through his binoculars, James could see armed men in tactical gear preparing to deploy. The bomb disposal technician suddenly stood up and looked directly at James with an expression that carried no trace of the professional courtesy expected from a colleague. "Sergeant Mitchell, I think we need to have a conversation." James found himself facing a choice that would define the rest of his life, however long that might be. He could surrender to what were obviously hostile forces and hope that his cooperation would buy time for Webb and MI5 to continue the investigation. Or he could attempt to escape and preserve his role as a witness to the conspiracy, regardless of the immediate cost. The decision was made for him when the fake bomb disposal technician reached for what was clearly a weapon rather than technical equipment. James dove behind the ornamental pond stone retaining wall just as the first shots rang out across the normally peaceful garden. All units, shots fired at the pond area. Armed response required immediately. James broadcast over his radio while crawling toward better cover. But even as he spoke, he realized that some of the people monitoring his communication might be working with his attackers. The next 20 minutes transformed the king's beloved gardens into a battlefield. James used his knowledge of the estate's layout to stay ahead of the tactical teams while maintaining radio contact with Webb. But as he moved from cover to cover, dodging bullets and explosions, he realized that the conspiracy had prepared for the possibility that their operation might be discovered.
"James, you need to get to the main house."
Webb's voice was tight with tension. "We're evacuating the king to the secure facility, but we need you to confirm that the route is clear." Negative control. The tactical teams have positioned themselves to cut off access to the main house. Whatever evacuation route you're planning, they'll be expecting it. Then what do you suggest? James looked toward the house where he could see increased activity around the king's private quarters. Security personnel were moving with the urgency that indicated an imminent evacuation, but their movements seemed oddly coordinated, as if they were following a predetermined plan rather than responding to an emergency. "Control, I don't think the evacuation is genuine. I think it's part of their operation." The silence that followed his transmission lasted long enough for James to wonder if his communication was being jammed. When Webb finally responded, his voice carried a weight of terrible realization. "And James, you're right. The evacuation order came through the same emergency channels that authorized the fake bomb disposal technician. They're using our own protocols to isolate the king." Understanding flooded through James like cold water. The attack at the pond had been a diversion, designed to draw security attention away from the main house while the real assassination team moved into position. His discovery of the surveillance equipment had forced them to accelerate their timeline, but they had backup plans that were even more sophisticated than their original approach. "Where is the king now?" "En route to the secure facility, but James, I'm not sure we can trust the security team that's escorting him. Can you establish direct contact with His Majesty?" Negative. Standard protocol during emergency evacuations is radio silence to prevent tracking. James realized that the king was effectively isolated, surrounded by people who might be loyal protectors or skilled assassins. There was no way to verify the identity or intentions of his escort team, and the secure facility they were heading for could easily become a killing ground if the wrong people were waiting there. Making a decision that violated every protocol he had ever learned, James left his cover and began running toward the estate's vehicle compound. If he could reach a car, he might be able to intercept the king's convoy before it reached the secure facility. But as he approached the parking area, James discovered that he was not the only one who had anticipated this move. 2 of the tactical teams were positioned to prevent anyone from leaving the estate, and their weapons were trained on the access road. "This is Sergeant Mitchell," he broadcast on all security frequencies. "The king is in immediate danger from hostile forces within his security escort. I repeat, the evacuation is compromised." The response came not from Webb, but from a voice that James didn't recognize. "Mitchell, this is Deputy Director Harrison. Stand down immediately. You are interfering with authorized security operations." The use of his surname without rank suggested that Harrison considered him to be outside the chain of command, possibly even a hostile threat. But more alarming was the realization that a deputy director was personally involved in managing the situation, indicating that the conspiracy reached higher into the security hierarchy than anyone had suspected. "Sir, I have evidence of surveillance equipment and explosive devices planted by unauthorized personnel. The king's safety is compromised. Mitchell, you are ordered to report to the main house for debriefing. Failure to comply will result in immediate arrest. James understood that he was being offered a choice between surrender and being hunted as a fugitive. But surrender would mean the end of any possibility of protecting the king, while resistance might buy time for MI5 to intervene with external resources. He chose resistance. Using his training in tactical movement and his intimate knowledge of the estate's layout, James began making his way toward the secure facility through routes that would be difficult to monitor or intercept. But as he moved through the shadows of the estate's woodland areas, he realized that he was being systematically herded toward a specific location. The tactical teams weren't just trying to capture him. They were driving him toward a predetermined killing ground where they could eliminate him without witnesses. The conspiracy had planned for the possibility that their operation might be discovered, and had prepared contingencies for dealing with anyone who threatened to expose them. As darkness fell over Highgrove, James found himself engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with professional killers who had unlimited resources and detailed knowledge of the estate. But he also realized that his resistance was buying precious time for external intervention. At 21:30 hours, his secure communication device vibrated with an incoming message from Sarah. Cavalry en route. Hold position and stay alive for 20 minutes. The next 20 minutes were the longest of James Mitchell's life. Moving from cover to cover through the estate's gardens and woodland, he managed to stay ahead of the tactical teams while maintaining intermittent radio contact with Webb. But the psychological pressure of being hunted was overwhelming, and he could feel his rational decision-making beginning to deteriorate. When the first helicopters appeared in the distance, James initially feared that the conspirators had called in additional resources. But as the aircraft approached with searchlights blazing, he realized that MI5 had arrived with a full tactical response team. The battle for Highgrove lasted another 40 minutes, but the outcome was never in doubt once legitimate security forces became involved. The fake tactical teams were overwhelmed and captured, along with substantial evidence of their conspiracy. The surveillance equipment and explosive devices provided proof of their intentions, while their communication intercepts revealed the full scope of the plot. But the most important discovery came when MI5 intercepted the king's evacuation convoy just minutes before it reached the secure facility. The facility had been compromised, and the king's escort team included 3 operatives who were preparing to complete the assassination once they reached the isolated location. In the aftermath of the operation, James Mitchell found himself debriefing with intelligence officials, who confirmed that the conspiracy had reached the highest levels of government and security services. Minister Harrison, Deputy Director Harrison, and Chief Inspector Hartwell were all arrested on charges of treason and conspiracy to commit murder. The investigation revealed that Blackstone Strategic Services had been planning the operation for over 2 years, using their government connections to gather intelligence and position their operatives within royal security. Their goal had been not just to assassinate the king, but to trigger a political crisis that would justify increased surveillance and security measures throughout the UK. 6 months later, James Mitchell received the George Medal for his role in protecting the king and exposing the conspiracy. But the recognition felt hollow compared to the knowledge that he had helped preserve not just a life, but the constitutional foundation of British democracy. Standing in the garden at Highgrove, where the ordeal had begun, James reflected on how a willingness to question authority and follow his instincts had prevented a catastrophe that could have changed the course of history. The invisible royal guard had become the most visible defender of everything he had sworn to protect. But he also understood that his service had fundamentally changed. He would never again be able to assume that the system itself was trustworthy, never again be able to follow orders without questioning their source and motivation. The conspiracy had been defeated, but the vigilance required to prevent future threats would be a permanent burden. As he resumed his duties protecting the king, James Mitchell carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty requires the courage to break the rules. Sometimes protecting what you serve means risking everything you've built, and sometimes a single person's willingness to act on their convictions can prevent the destruction of everything they hold dear. The ornamental pond had been restored to its original beauty, and the king once again took his daily walks through the gardens. But James would never again see those peaceful pathways without remembering the hidden dangers that had lurked beneath their surface. or the price of remaining vigilant in a world where enemies could disguise themselves as protectors. The protocol had been broken, but the crown endured. And in the end, that was all that mattered.